Hi, everyone, and welcome to CityBiz Executive Interviews. I'm Tom Kiehn, co-founder and managing director of Snow Hill, an investor relations advisory firm with offices in London, New York, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. Today, we've got a great interview lined up with Sahir Ali, who is founder and CEO of Modi Ventures. Sahir is a highly accomplished technology and healthcare leader, investor, board advisor, with extensive experience in AI, medical imaging, cancer research, and cloud computing, amongst other things. So there's a lot to talk about today. These are all things that are in the headlines of the news. So with that, let's jump right into our chat with Sahir Ali. Now, Sahir, less than a month ago, Modi Ventures launched a new $32 million Tech+Bio Fund I. Can you tell us about the fund's mandate and why you've decided to focus on tech bio, life sciences, and healthcare AI right now?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. I think decided to jump into the venture world, particularly at the intersection of technology, health, medicine, and AI for a couple of reasons. One was that I think the next couple of decades will belong to health and medicine. But generally speaking, if you look at overall the market conditions, what has happened with high interest rates, which effectively dried up funding. I think this was a great opportunity to enter the space, as you say. When there's as we know that when there's funding that's dried up, there's really investors market. So from the macroeconomics, this was a great opportunity for us to get in. But more importantly, I think what's happened is what I and others have called this is the century of biology. I think last century was about the electricity. We started the century with electricity coming into our homes, which eventually gave us lights and electrified our machines, and eventually gave us transistors, computers, data. In fact, artificial intelligence was really the perceptron came in the 60s. And so if you think about what we did this century, we started this century with Human Genome Project, which wrapped up. So I think we're in the right era. I think these are areas that are now investable, and I think these are going to have great implications to human lives as well. So, which is what one of our mandates are. Happy to double click on any other areas that.
Yeah, let's double click on a bit on your fund and some of your initial investments. I understand you've just kicked off the fund, but you've already made several investments into some promising health tech companies. Can you just walk us through kind of what those companies are and what attracted you to those companies in particular at this point?
Yes. So we've been in operation for last 5 months or so, and we've made some investments in direct. But before I talked about that, I do want to talk about the fund's mandate, which I previously didn't mention, that we also invest in other venture funds as limited partners. And again, similar thesis applies. We're looking for great fund managers who are at the intersection of technology, health, and are creating amazing companies and funding these founders. And so we are limited partners in Coleslaw. If you look at their portfolio, a pretty healthy portfolio in digital health and therapeutics and all. We're also investors with Section 32. These guys are previous founders of Google X Ventures, which the Google X were all the projects that involved health, medicine, even at that time AI, and some really moonshot projects. We're also investors in Antler, which kind of has a global sort of presence. They are the kind of the Y Combinator of the world now, starting to become one. And so we also do that. And the idea for us is that based out of Houston, yes, we have deep networks and reach. Just becoming partners with some greater funds, we can co-invest alongside them as well because we can be technical. Now, the direct investments we've done, as you asked, I'd like to talk about a company that is actually based out of Houston, Starling Medical. They were Y Combinator batch, and their motto is really simple: is how do we bring some of this technology into the toilet in the bathroom, because really a lot depends on uh, what's coming out in form of in urine. As we know, urine is really the garbage collection of our bodies, and so they've created a device that could plug into any really toilet, and it can monitor the flow of the urine. And idea is that can we do remote continuous monitoring of certain diseases that really require us, particularly the doctors, to look at what's happening in urine. And so Starling Medical has this device that's FDA approved now, and this will enable uh, folks with chronic disease, especially high risk pregnancies, and even urologists who are at risk of patients who are at risk of prostate cancer, to be able to remotely continuously monitor them. And this will ping the providers with right data. So I think this was quite exciting. This is the area of digital health, which we also call more precision health and personalized medicine as well, which enables this level of granularity in terms of what happens when you leave a doctor's office, right? We only see doctor for 15 minutes, but there are changes that are happening. So this would enable particularly the urologists and in other areas. The other investment that we're quite excited about is a company called Lepsy Health. This is a company based out of Amsterdam. We are lead investors in that company. I also have a board seat there. This company is quite stealth, but what I'll say is that I'll pose these questions to the audience and to your audience and everybody else, is that if you think about the world of medicine, quite a lot of things are now digitized. And so if you think about the MRI, it's digitized, it's available to be viewed on the machine, on the computers and laptops. You look at your blood report, now there are APIs, so the blood reports no longer get faxed around. They're all available on the computers. You look at your echograms and all. But one thing that really hasn't been digitized is the sound. Our bodies have phenomenal sounds that are present, which physicians are trained uh, to listen to, and we call this space the auscultation or auscultatory sounds. Our hearts make sounds. This is where the physician really is able to, in regular checkups, be able to see if the health of the heart is okay. This is where the murmurs are detected, the cardiovascular events. Our lungs make sounds. And there are the infections, particularly initially, can be diagnosed through by listening to the sounds. Yet none of these sounds are digitized. What physicians hears, there's no record of it. There's no way uh, to trend those. And so Lepsy Health is developing medical devices which are cutting edge, which will have incorporation of AI as well, and enable a sort of a first principle designs on how to capture some of these sounds at the site of care, which means it will be available for physicians. And so quite excited about that backing that technology, and the founding team is amazing. And the one last one I want to talk about is Cyberdontics. Now, again, this company also in early stage, but quite stealth. They're developing a robotic arm that can perform root canals. And the idea here is that it's not because we just want a robot to do it better. I think the idea, well, of course, that's always the case with incorporation of some technology. What is the value add? And I think the value add here is also for the dentists. Typically, procedures like root canal would take about hour and a half, 2 hours, and a lot of that depends on just availability of hands. And so, if there was a robotic arm and that can do this faster and more precise, it enables also dental practices to see more patients. And so, one thing I want to point out to that is that whenever you have a robot arm, it requires three-dimensional view of the world, right? So if there's a robot like the Da Vinci, which is quite prominent in hospitals, it needs to be able to see things in three-dimensional. Now, but if you've been unfortunate like myself, you've gone to dental office a couple of times, there's an X-ray that's taken for the tooth. It's two-dimensional, and so the first part of the innovation they've done is be able to create a technology that can create three-dimensional view of the tooth in a low-cost, affordable manner. And then they're working on the robotics arm. So quite excited about that. So these are some series of investments I want to talk about. There are some others which are in the pipeline quite stealth, and we can jump into those. But these were our series of first few investments which excited us, and we decided to take bets on those.
That's great to hear. All sorts of applications that really wouldn't have even crossed my mind. So, as somebody who really has a lot of experience in AI and robotics, it seems like it really has the potential to play a transformative role in healthcare. And I'm curious what you think Which areas do you see AI and robotics having the most significant impact for society?
I would like to break them into AI, and then I'll come to the robotics part. I think if I think the idea of artificial intelligence. So I think first I would like to say what is really artificial intelligence. I think we tend to mix those up with machine learnings and deep learning, and as you hear, really AI or artificial intelligence is nothing but a set of goals or aspirations for us as humans to have systems or machines that can learn, can do deductions, or can do perform tasks that are human like. Really just set of goals we define like to define as AI. I think in the recent time, what has captured our imaginations is the field of machine learning and deep learning, where we're able to train machines to look at data, or in our now in recent cases, large data, and learn from that. And so, why this is a paradigm shift? Previously, with the advent of computers, we were able to go in and exactly write out rules on how to process certain data coming in. This, which is what we call programs, right? So if a user was to press W, this character should jump up on the screen. Now that's a hard rule that's programmed into the computer, which is called programs. And then there's a paradigm shift in machine learning. What happens with machine learning is instead of programming the rules that, hey, when the W is pressed, make this happen, we rather let computer write its own program by looking at series of examples or series of data, series of previous experiences. This is where machine learning comes in, and this is a paradigm shift. So this is program writing a program, and this is really what has now led to the point of ChatGPT. Is really there's just large amounts of data that's just present on the world with Wikipedia, and just thrown into this model called transformers, and they're able to find rules that just humans just don't have the capacity to label and things like that. So anyways, so let's just find that. What's the implication to this in health? I think there's some huge uh, upsides, and of course there's some dangers, of course, with every technology. Let me start by saying that there's big data floating in our own bodies. Every cell in our body has a DNA. Every cell. That DNA contains 3 billion base pairs. And so now, if we were to sequence that, the human genome, 1 terabytes of data plus comes out. So let's just start with that. That's DNA, which is what we call genomics, which tells us what we inherited, what genes are there, what's our molecular makeup. Once those genes are turned on, that becomes epigenetics, or methylations and all. And then once those genes are then converted into proteins, that data is floating in our body. Now, because of this sequencing technology, we can actually sequence and digitize all of this data from our blood. And so there's terabytes and terabytes of data just from samples of blood that are just floating in our own body. Well, humans can't process that. First of all, we don't even have the capacity to even analyze what's happening. This is really where I think the one part of biggest advantage that machine learning and AI brings to this to table is being able to look at massive amounts of data makes sense where we just can't do it. So I think personalized medicine, particularly with genomics and this proteomics and all of this entire area is called multi-omics. I think that field entirely is happening because of AI. So that's just one aspect. And why is that important? Because multi-omics is so important, we can find signals floating around in our bodies that could detect cancer maybe 3 or 4 years even before MRIs can. So huge implications to finding cancers early. Same technology could be used to find proteins or target proteins in our bodies to treat diseases that are untreatable. So, and designing drugs. So you can imagine like just huge gamut of things that can happen. The other aspect is just healthcare delivery. If you look at what's happening in the hospital systems, if I go to a hospital system, say with a chest pain, uh, as soon as you go to the hospital system, you're leaving certain levels of biomedical data behind. And so my vitals were taken. Then I was given an echogram or a cardiogram. That's another level of data, different dimension of the data. And then I've seen a cardiologist. I was given a medication. So that's another level of data. And all these data are siloed and available in the hospitals. Yet what happens is every department, so to speak, looks at it. So radiologist looks at his own data, pathologist will look at his own data, and then a pharmacist only looks at prescription. But what really AI can do here is collapse all of this and create kind of like a Google map of the human body and a journey which can allow us to really start doing personalized medicine rather than an average patient medicine. So that's another huge area that I think um, really made possible because of the advances in AI. And then robotics, of course. I think the one last part is robotics has a huge play in the healthcare space. For one primary reason is that we just don't have enough manpower, or just not enough highly trained surgeons. We don't have enough of a lot of the physicians and dentists. And so that's a very clear value proposition. If we can get them to be quite accurate and trustworthy, I think it's kind of an um, easy thing to imagine. But I think these things have even bigger implications in third world countries, where you have very few of the highly specialized trained surgeons and all. And so I think there's a bigger value proposition to global sort of health equity than just us imagining what robots can do for us here in the first world. I'll pause here and see if you want to double click on something.
Yeah, actually, you just touched on a couple issues that I think are really important. A lot of times when we think about AI and robotics, we're talking about efficacy and precision and things like that. But you just also talked about accessibility and affordability, specifically when it comes to third world countries. And you don't even have to go to a third world country when you're talking about affordability and accessibility of healthcare. So, what potential do you see for these new emerging technologies to rein in the cost of healthcare, make it not only more effective but accessible?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it's a question that not many of us here, especially in iterating on developing some of these technologies, are thinking about in the first world. Let me give you an example. Especially in the cancer workflow on solid tumors, the cancers that are not in the blood. Really, the first step of diagnosis for those is medical imaging, either ultrasound or mammograms or PET scans, CT scans. Really identifies, hey, there's a tumor, there's something weird going on here. That's the radiologist. And then once we have confirmed that there's something suspicious, the next step really is to go out and take a small sample, and then pathologist looks under a microscope, again visual inspection, right? And then based on these two, it goes to an oncologist, unfortunately, if the cancer is present, how to treat this patient. And so if you look at this workflow, radiology and pathology are highly visual, subjective fields. And while we don't know all the data, but you'll be surprised to know that pathologists on the borderline cases, which could mean no chemotherapy versus chemotherapy, less aggressive versus aggressive, those borderline cases, they only agree 66 or 67% of the times. In fact, there was a very famous study that was conducted at Harvard in 2008. And I think if someone was to look up radiology and gorilla study, they'll find this on the Google. And the idea of this study was that about, don't quote me on the number here, but I think about 30 or so highly trained radiologists were shown a series of lung CT scan. Okay. And then they were said, hey, do what you do, find nodules or, in one of those series of CT scans, in one of the lungs images, a gorilla was photoshopped on one of the corners, and 87% of radiologists missed that. And so this is not to ding radiologists. I think they're really highly trained. They're very, very specialized in what they do. But that's the thing. That's also the downside. They're so used to looking at one area and something that they miss all the other information that could be relevant. And this is where AI can really come in, and it can look at massive amounts of those pixels and maybe find patterns. And so that was part of my academic training, was that we were looking at digital pathology, where how do we find patterns that human eye can't see, and can we predict something about the outcome or recurrence of cancer very early on, right? So oncologists can look at if this patient should get aggressive treatment now, or maybe we can watch for a bit and less aggressive. Now the answer, so what's the implication to global equity here, health equity? Think about if what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years in the United States, particularly, these AI algorithms obviously have a very high bar. They have to show a very high level of efficacy. They have to show a high accuracy. This is how we let some. But if you think about certain cities in Africa and India and parts of the world where those entire cities with millions of people only have one or two radiologists or one or two pathologists in the entire country. Now, do you imagine an algorithm that has 85 or 88% algorithm accuracy that runs on the cloud and just gets pinged with these images and comes back and helps triage? I think that's a different value proposition than the first world. First world has a high bar for some things, because here the question is, should we incorporate and at what cost? Over there it's really about access, truly about access. And so those are some things to consider. Some things I think uh, we all have to consider is that what level of technology gets deployed where I think we'll have different level of value propositions. So one last other example I would like to give is that in certain areas of the world, the uh, access to even a physician means that you have to take an entire day off and travel and and see a physician. And so these are obviously charitable clinics. They have they have massive intakes, but what some of the governments have started to do is put these telemedicine booths where you can just put that in the village and a doctor can remotely look at the patient. And so you have, that's why the digital devices, IoT devices, are pretty big plays there. So the heart rate monitoring and the blood pressure and all. Now if I imagine, I had mentioned in the beginning one of our investments, Lapsy Health. Now imagine a device that can also listen to oscillatory sounds, right? Heart and lungs. That's one of the fundamental reasons why in third world countries, especially in villages, folks get sick, is infections. But then telemedicine boots, if a doctor can't hear the lungs, it's hard to diagnose that. And so a value proposition of something like that here in the United States, maybe like, okay, this could be a good to have, but in some areas it almost becomes a must have. And so we need to consider some of these things as we think about technology and how it impacts health and delivery.
Well, it's an understatement to say that there's been a lot of enthusiasm about AI more broadly over the last 9 months. But there's also been some calls for caution from tech leaders, some people even asking for a 6 month pause in AI development. As you look at an area as critical as medicine and healthcare, um, how do you see the right balance being struck, Sahir, between development at a breakneck pace and a more risk averse approach? And as a capital allocator yourself, what do you see as your role in that process?
Yes, I think everybody knows that pausing AI and the letter that came out, it's divided opinions on that. I'm of the opinion that it's hard to pause something which we don't know as a product. And so it's almost as if we were to try to regulate transistors. A transistor could go into a device that could potentially deployed, could have implications. And so for that, we had FCC and we have ISO standards and things like that. And I tend to think AI is a tool in the similar manner. I think AI detecting my face on Facebook application has a different ramifications than, say, a similar facial recognition getting installed to monitor people in public for for enforcement, has a different ramification. So I think the way I like to think about that is, where is AI being deployed needs to be thought about, and perhaps regulations come in there double clicking if this is going to have massive ramifications in terms of perhaps biases and those issues. Then we also have to have these product developers have a highest level of burdens and providing details on what sort of data this was trained on. And I will give you a quick example. The North Point has an algorithm called Compass. This was deployed about 7 or 8 years ago in about 10 states. 10 states, United States court system. This algorithm is data science driven algorithms that judges can use to look at a propensity of a criminal, uh, someone with a criminal previous criminal record, propensity to commit the crime again. And this was deployed, and turns out you can imagine what issues this could have because it was trained on data that was previously available. And you can look at that. It went through the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, I believe, and the case was thrown out not because of the merit of biases into this algorithm, but more on who the plaintiff was. But point is, you can imagine these kind of setup needs to have some sort of enforcement regulations. But just because the R&D of AI is still so early, and needs that kind of a fast paced to get us where we need to, especially in dire areas, which I already mentioned, cancer therapeutics, figuring out aggressive disease, looking at what's happening in our bodies. I think if you pause those developments, it's actually not useful. So I'm of the opinion, simply put, is that I think instead of pausing AI development, let's look at where these things are going to get deployed, and let's create frameworks for that, just like FDA has, right? We don't ban looking at molecules and combining them and looking at cells and editing them. But we're talking about where are they going to get applied, when are they going to be applied. So there's a high burden on companies, especially biotech companies, to prove efficacies and safety data, and there's a whole pathway to coming out. I think something similar can happen, but I don't think pausing development of a technology is the right approach, in my humble opinion.
Thanks. That's really helpful. So it sounds like you're saying it really is about context of the application, and in kind of in concert with oversight from the regulatory side. So to wrap things up, Sahir, I'm curious which emerging health innovation excites you the most on a personal level as you look forward.
Yes, I think this notion of using cells as therapies, as pills, is personally very exciting. And this encompasses gene editing and gene therapy. And what do I mean by that? I think medical science is very new in long, no, grand scheme of things, and pharmaceuticals world is new in that sense. So it's just been 100 years actually when we first came out with antibiotics, and what was the principle of that, which changed how we treat diseases, and obviously it prolonged lives, because one of the prominent reasons why folks couldn't live longer was infections. You had an infection, that was pretty much at times death sentence. Antibiotics changed that, um, and and what that did is it kind of gave us this mindset that the drug development for next 100 years until now has been that if there's a disease, let's develop a drug that can kill something. So take pill, kill something. That's been the model. What we are now with genetics and genome sequence, and now understanding the causality of disease, meaning we now know how disease and why disease is caused. So we can actually flip this model. We can actually go and turn that disease off at its core, rather than treating the disease with drugs to kill something. And so that's what gene editing is all about. We can go and we can first figure out what set of genes you've inherited and have, or present, or some changes to it. And if they're turned on, can we turn them off? Or can we turn or correct those issues in our genome? I think that's the most, personally, the most exciting. And why is that so exciting? In fact, if you look at disease like Down syndrome, in the United States, practically um, every mother would go through some kind of testing in the first or second trimester that monitors for Down syndrome, sort of in the imaging, and then there's genetic tests that are available. And now with those testing, now we can identify that, hey, this baby will have Down syndrome. What can these parents do after knowing that? Nothing really. But with gene editing type of advances, when it comes out, I think it could be an injection into the embryo, and we could turn that gene off. And so while that is huge implications. I think we have to be very careful with these kind of technologies. As you know, on the flip side is, as we know that a few years ago out of China, same technology that was coming out of the labs, someone in China, a scientist, was able to edit a baby with certain genes, and which became known as designer babies. And obviously, the good news is since then, even Chinese government acted on that and kind of shut that down. So we're starting to think ramifications of something like that from a societal perspective. And I think we will come together and create frameworks. But I think the upsides are huge. I think this will allow us to live longer, healthier, and eradicate certain disease, which at the moment just don't have any cure, and just really create hardship for individuals or families. So personally, I think will be a paradigm shift where instead of taking a pill, can we just reprogram ourselves? So that excites me.
That's great. That's great. That is exciting indeed. Sahir Ali from Modi Ventures, thank you very much for this interview, and thanks to all the viewers at CityBiz for tuning in. Thanks, and see you next time.
Thank you for having me.